This is always a very interesting process where we go live, but we have to check because uh I guess because
Do you
oh
need me
no,
to do a sound check or is
we
everything fine? Just your end.
you're perfect. You're
Okay, great.
perfect. Just trying to. Okay, there we go. We are live. Oh my god. Wow. Okay. Um Smile. Um there we go. We are live, ladies and gentlemen, and uh I guess ladies and gentlemen is not something to say anymore. Everyone, this is the 2020 election and whatnot. I am very excited to be with you today. Joining us is the formidable Elisabeth Anker Libby, who is a colleague, a friend, and an awesome person who impromptu was, you know, generous enough to join me today because the election is still ongoing apparently, and we are very happy to have you. I'll mention. I want to say a few things about your bio, but first, Libby, good afternoon, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, me too. And I would like to just say a few words about you so people know who you are. You are Elisabeth Anker. Uh, Elisabeth Anker is an associate professor of American Studies and political science at George Washington University, where she researches political theory and American political culture. She is the author of Orgies of Feeling. Yes, you heard it correctly. She is the author of Orgies of Feeling, Melodrama, and the Politics of Freedom. And is finishing two books now, which is really depressing for a lot of us who are not finishing two books. Um, Actually, I am finishing. I'm working on two books, Ugly Freedoms and the Wrath of Sovereignty is one of them. No, wait a minute. That's two of them, and is not the is not is basically it's two books. Ugly Freedoms, that's one, and The Wrath of Sovereignty, that's another.
Hmm.
She is the co-editor of Theory and Event, and a frequent contributor on international television and radio news. And I could attest to that because I just saw a clip of hers this morning on Al Jazeera English, and she's in many other places. So, welcome, Libby. Thank you for joining us. And first thing I want to ask you, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Are you feeling okay given uh, COVID, the election, and other things?
I mean, this is such a chaotic time. So, on the one hand, I am absolutely a wreck. And, we're waiting anxiously to find out about the election. On the other hand, I am healthy. My entire family is healthy. We're in a house, we're employed. So, for that, I'm grateful. I mean, we'll see where
That's
things go, but it's been manageable.
great. Great to hear. As you know, I shared with you quickly that this is just a series that we're putting together. It could be for for it's an ASI series. It could be a part of what we have at my university, at George Mason University, in my school, the Schar School. It could be part of the Schar Conversations podcast. It's basically about the elections, and I'm happy to have you here to ask a few questions. And I want to start with something that is not necessarily so basic. Actually, I thought I was going to start with something basic, but let's start with given the deadlock we are seeing and given the polarization that we have been witnessing for quite some time, especially since 2016. Uh, are we at a particular a historical juncture where do you see a huge rift in American politics that we haven't seen before? Is there a civil war looming, as some on the right claim? And frankly, the right wing, quote unquote, right wing conservative media, which I listen to quite a bit. I'm not sure why, but they also are claiming that they are scared and afraid of disruption and protests from the quote unquote other side, right? The radical left and so on and so forth. So, can you speak to that, please? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we are in a really I think we are in a really momentous point. I mean, there have obviously been many other rifts in U.S. politics, but I think what we're seeing right now is pretty meaningful. I mean, on the one hand, we have Trump and his supporters who are actually doing significantly better than I think many people expected, and certainly better than a lot of people had hoped, in the sense that where I think, over the last 4 years, we presumed that once people saw Trump's violence, his attacks on so many people within and without US politics, right, his kind of disastrous plans about foreign policy, his incompetence with COVID, I think we presumed that Trump would not succeed. And instead, what we've seen is the opposite. He actually has garnered a lot of support here. And his support has been growing and increasingly violent, which I think is something that is quite scary. We also have seen, and this is something that I actually find more promising and interesting, is a real galvanization of a strong leftist politics that we haven't seen in years. I mean, when we think about the protests this summer with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I mean, those protests were the largest protests in US history. They, had millions and millions of people who were involved. And although the protests were certainly Black led, they were also multiracial coalitions. They were multi ethnic, multi religious, so many people were coming together to make an argument for a better world, a more inclusive one that does not support state sanctioned Black violence. And I think we're seeing a kind of interesting intersectional kind of democratic politics that is rising up from the ground level. It's certainly not, about Joe Biden in the way that a lot of Trumpist politics is catalyzed by Trump. So to me, we're seeing, a kind of real movement for pushing towards greater inclusion, more of a kind of politics where people have power from across the political spectrum. And certainly people who have been denied politics, women, people of color, who are now claiming politics and power in a way that they have often been denied in US history. I think that's something really promising. When we think about how so many Trump supporters find that kind of power claiming as violent, or something that leaves them powerless, I think we need to ask and figure out, what is it about the fact that people are trying to make claims for greater equality and greater freedom, and why do Trump supporters see that as a form of oppression? Right? For them, right, I think hierarchies of power where they are on top is what they presume American politics should be. And so part of the rift is not only people with different political positions, but people who are arguing that they are the ones who get to hoard power, as they historically have done in US politics. And we see a whole another group of people who I think we haven't seen in a while, kind of at this huge level and so coalitional, of people who are trying to argue for greater equality and freedom.
Thank you. Thanks, Libby. That was a mouthful. Thank you very much. So, one of the things, because I've talked to a couple of people that actually from George Mason, Jennifer Victor, and Marieli Lopez Santana, and I want to ask you questions along some of the lines that I asked, but also different in the sense that, given what has been happening the past 4 years, and given all sorts of commentary about Trump and his style, questions of incompetence, questions of just being bombastic and sort of irresponsible in various ways, things that have to do with I don't know. I mean, not incitement to violence, but sort of, leaving the door open. Why is it that, in your view, why is it that he still commands the attention? I mean, literally commands the attention and has the support of almost half the American public. I mean, it's maybe it's not a fair question, but why is that the case? Why do also, in addition to that, or from basically based on that, why do people think he is actually a victim in this particular election of mass fraud, which of course was addressed by him many weeks, if not more, directly about the prospect of elections.
I think those of us who study US politics and are certainly situated in this space, right? One of the things we have to come to terms with is the way in which people find so much pleasure in Donald Trump, right? They find pleasure in his forms where he argues that wants to dominate over other people. They find pleasure in his rallies where he tries to incite violence against journalists or against vulnerable people or against people with disabilities, against immigrants, against Muslims. It's not only that it's like a politics of hatred, but there's a politics of pleasure, I think, in the ways in which he seems to suggest that he can dominate over other people. And he seems to offer his supporters that they too, by supporting him, can almost have that pleasure of dominating over other people. I've been joking around and calling it trickle down domination, right? But there's a way in which that's part of what he's promising people. And I think those of us who study American politics, I think we need to take that seriously, right? That's why when we think about how, people have made the false claim that people support Donald Trump because they are uneducated or because they don't have a lot of money. But when we actually look at people from other racial backgrounds, right, those claims don't hold, because we do see people who don't have higher than a college education, or I mean, sorry, higher than a high school education, people who don't have a lot of money, who are black and brown, who are not supporting Trump. So I think, there's something that is about whiteness, about Trump's promises of domination to people that he presumes should not have it. There's a kind of masculinized violence that he's often promising. I mean, so much of his language is sexualized in what he promises to do to people who don't agree with him, how he promises to control others. And I think a lot of his supporters like that. So that's part of, and a lot of people do, because a lot of people find Trump compelling. And it seems that what we're seeing, given the difference between polling and what we're actually seeing in the voting booth, is a lot of people feel that way, and they may be a little bit embarrassed to say it, which is already one indication that there's a problem, that they know that, their desires are problematic. So they might say they're not voting for Trump, but we're still seeing people in huge amounts, more than even polling predicted, voting for him. So when it gets to something like election fraud, I think once again, I mean, Trump said he was going to claim fraud before the election even happened. So this strategy is not surprising to anybody. And as he continually says, he's only claiming fraud in the places where it's close, right? He's not claiming that there was fraud in South Carolina. So I think his supporters also kind of know that this claim is not necessarily true. But I think it's a way of trying to claim domination over those people who might have even thought of voting for Biden, or might be edging up against what they presume is their right to have Trump in office, or at least the kind of control that he commands that they seem to want over their own lives or over their own spaces. So I think, as we know, Trump is not necessarily taking it seriously. And I think his supporters might not be taking claims of fraud that seriously either, even though they're out there fighting for it.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if I should say thank you. uh, well, yeah. I mean, this is something that has bedeviled a lot of people. First in 2016, where he basically came back from behind, and now before the elections, we have seen that polls have predicted that the margin would be much wider than what we have seen. But of course, that was not true. And we kept hearing from conservative media and, Fox News and so on, including the barrage of talk show hosts on radio who basically kept saying that these are problematic polls. They represent the far left, or the media, the liberal media conspiring with the Biden campaign, and so on and so forth. And of course, the response was, "Oh, this is propaganda against these polls and so on." But it turned out to be not far from the truth. Do you have any thoughts on the legitimacy of polls? I mean, is this a point? Because we were discussing this on a list with friends. Is this a turning point in terms of people's faith in polls and the methodology that they adopt?
Here's something that I've been wondering about as well, because in 2016, the polls predicted Hillary would win, and she didn't. And in large part, that was because polls were looking at likely voters, and a lot of Trump voters were first-time voters. So we kind of understood that. People corrected for it. And when we look at 2018, the polls were correct, right? They basically predicted that there would be a blue wave, that the Democrats would take over the House, and they did. And yet then again in 2020, all of a sudden the polls are incorrect again. So it seems to me that maybe the problem is a little bit less polling as a science writ large than there's something about Trump. And it would be of course there's certainly forms of voter suppression, but I also really think, what is it about Trump that people will tell pollsters that they're not voting for him and then they do? Right? What is it about Trump that maybe right, the shy Trump voter, maybe people realize that it's not, you know, that maybe their value system doesn't actually accord with Trump, or at least whatever they explicitly say their value system is, or maybe they feel embarrassed to say it in front of friends and family who might say, like, how could you support somebody who locks children in cages, or literally can't manage a coronavirus? And then they vote for him in the polls. So to me, it's not only that, polling, I am not sure I want to claim that polling is illegitimate anymore, that it can't capture something, but it seems to me what it can't capture is Donald Trump. Because as we saw in 2018, polls worked. So there's something to me that's more about how people actually feel about their own decision to vote for Trump, which once again is why I go back to these questions about desire and pleasure. What is Trump bringing to people that, even though they know it's not socially sanctioned to vote for him within their milieu or community or whatever, they still do it? And that to me is something that polls can't capture.
Are you saying that Trump is like weed?
I think Trump is more like, if it
You
was
know,
like weed, he'd actually
I,
be relaxing people. He's more like the really bad habit that you're trying to hide from people, but that you're
yeah,
secretly addicted to.
yeah, I mean,
He's like smack. He's our smack president.
yeah, because people deny that left and right. Okay. Well, thanks again. I should stop saying thank you to every answer. I have this habit. So yeah. Okay, I'll move on to the next question now.
No
Um,
thanks ever again.
no
Never
thanks.
thank me again.
Never, never. Actually, yeah, nothing. What is, in your view, given what we are witnessing, um, and the trajectory of the two party system, what is it that you think what is the status of the Democratic Party today, under Biden? And do you think that, if in the event of a Biden win, are we likely to see uh, more opportunities for expansion for the more, I don't want to say radical, because it just doesn't sound right. At the same time, that calling the Democratic Party left is also a misnomer. But maybe the progressive left, which is another word that also I think is just murky in the context of U.S. politics. So does it? What's the status of the Democratic Party under Trump, and does a Biden under Biden, and does a Biden win open the door for more progressive politics?
I've been struggling a bit with this question, because on the one hand, I did feel swayed by people who were criticizing the mainstream Democratic Party for not being able to catalyze on so much discontent to really rout Trump. I have a student who now works in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee, and she's a lawyer doing a lot of progressive politics stuff. And she a lot of the things she supported actually won this election. And one of the things she said was that in order to be successful in Wisconsin, you need to actually think of the Wisconsin Democrat State Party as an impediment, not work with them or their preferred vendors, and try to do as much, grassroots work without them. So I think there is some truth to that, to the kind of Democratic Party. We also know that, it Biden is not like the leader of the Democratic Party in the way that Trump is. He's certainly not like that charismatic figure. And a lot of people, I think, voted more for democracy, the Democratic platform, I should say, than for Biden specifically. There weren't a lot of people who were so compelled by him that he brought them in, which I think actually does leave room for more progressive politicians. And I agree that name is a little funny. So maybe one way to think about it is just the Democratic Socialists, right? The people who are running alongside DSA, who have done remarkably well in this election. And one of the things that's quite interesting is we've often seen people with more leftist political positions often be anti-electoral politics, anti-statist in the US, and the kind of claim that all real politics happens outside of our labyrinthine and turgid bureaucracies of American institutions. But I think what we're seeing is actually people who are working to reclaim the state in really interesting ways. And certainly like the Squad, but so many more politicians that we're actually seeing with pretty lefty credentials who are actually kind of jumping into the fray of electoral politics to try to push it in a more leftward direction. And they seem to be doing that work. They're certainly not a majority of the Democratic Party, but I think there's something interesting that's happening where what would it mean to actually be galvanizing the leader or the levers of state power to actually get real things done, to actually provide a living wage to people, to actually make the regulations that are needed to protect the climate, because there's some things like climate that you just need that kind of massive state power in order to put in those regulations. And seeing a lot of progressives or democratic socialists kind of getting their hands dirty and doing the work, I think is something that's really interesting. Whether or not that will happen at the presidential level is a whole nother kettle of fish.
Do you find that if it were someone else other than Biden, things would have been different in terms of the election? Because up to before he won the nomination, uh, I was following the Democratic primaries really closely, and there was this view that no matter how much establishment view, no matter how much you might like the alternatives, the more progressive alternatives, it's Biden that will actually potentially be able to beat Trump. And I sense some less than less than, I don't want to say prejudice, but I sense that this comment and this establishment view is based on this idea that somebody like Biden will appeal to a broader swath of the American public because of his sort of non-socialist politics and so on and so forth. Is this true? Would we have seen something different if it were some of his competitors who actually won the elections? I mean, the Democratic primaries.
I feel like in 2016,
Bernie.
Bernie would have succeeded. Mainly, not only were people enthusiastic about his policies, but he was not a woman. And we saw the way in which so many people, there was so much misogyny around Clinton, right? Not only that people didn't like her policies, which is like a legitimate political disagreement, but that so many people who found her brash or annoying, or they just didn't like her, right? Or she was too icky, right? All of those kind of weird misogynistic claims that would not have attached to Bernie Sanders. So I think Sanders could have won in 2016. I think 2020 is harder. On the one hand, I think people ended up supporting Biden really pragmatically because they felt that the American electorate would support him more. And one of the things the exit polls were showing, granted, they're always very, very skewed and problematic, especially in a year when most people didn't vote at the day of the election. But the biggest switch was actually among white men voting for moderate white men who had been independents or Republicans who were switching over to vote for Biden. So that vote, there is a chance that Biden would bring these people in a way that Bernie wouldn't. But I also think one of my colleagues, Jack Jackson, was at Whitman College, was just writing about this, that, even with these candidates, even with Biden and even with Clinton, they certainly, some people were excited about them. A lot of the kind of Democratic base was not. But in the end, they both won over, Hillary won more than 3 million votes. And Biden is now on track to win way more than that. So part of the problem is not just that people don't support these candidates, whether or not they're progressive or mainstream, but that our system is so fundamentally anti-democratic that even when a huge percentage of the US population supports them, all these anti-democratic things like the electoral college or voting suppression, right, actually prevents these people from getting into politics. So I think part of the lens is not only the limitations of the Democratic Party as it stands, but also what can we all do as a society to fight against this incredibly antiquated anti-democratic system that was built by slave owners in the 1700s and that literally blocks us from actually having the will of the people choose the president.
And what about, as you notice, I'm not saying thank you anymore. Your uh, answers, which I feel impolite. Um,
You could just say no, thank you.
no, thank you. As my daughter says, no, thank you. I don't know where she got this from. Okay, so what about the question of empathy? And we're talking about 50%, close to 50% of the population that doesn't agree with some of the you know things that are coming out in this discussion. So what about those people? I keep thinking about that. What about those people? I mean, I understand that there are differences, and there are differences based on substance, on social justice issues, on race. um I mean, how at the human level, I mean, forget social science, and these are people, these are like people, these are our neighbors, our colleagues, and how to deal with this question. And it's more stark now than it was maybe under previous presidents, like under Trump. It's like, really. And of course the response is sometimes, oh, it's not the man, the person, it's the policies, it's the taxes that compel me to vote in this direction. But I mean, is it really a matter of just a matter of struggle to overcome? Is it a matter of raising awareness? Is it a matter of, I mean, what is it? Or is it, my favorite question always when it comes to these issues, is that the way the political system is constructed, the two party system, is always going to lock us into this lesser evil approach, which seems to reproduce itself, which is why a lot of people say, let Trump win so that things can get worse before they can potentially get better. I mean, how can we speak to the other side? Um, what to do about the other side is, even if of course Trump loses. I mean, how does one proceed to deal with that phenomena and those sentiments that are real, that have human beings behind them? And if, after all, this is a democracy, or should be a democracy, and then where does the question of the two-state system fit in getting out of this sort of trap?
I think that's a really hard question, and I think it's got to be the question that we're thinking about moving forward. Um, on the one hand, when you look at a state like Florida, my home state, which is always a disaster, but they voted overwhelmingly, relatively overwhelmingly for Trump, and yet they also voted to back the minimum wage $15 an hour initiative, which Trump explicitly argued against and Biden argued for. So there already are these common grounds just in terms of what people actually want in terms of policy, that somehow is not, even as people want it and are fighting for it on the ground, it's not translating up to the higher levels of support for the Democratic Party. So I do think already on that we see there's some commonalities, or at least in certain positions. I also think, one of the things that I think progressives have done incredibly well is, especially since when Trump is kind of their antagonist, is the ways in which they have mobilized so many people since the start of Trump's time as our president. When we think of like the Women's March, which was already, a while ago, But what the Women's March did is it brought so many people into politics who had literally never participated on the streets before. And as we all know, having been to any protest, right, mailing in a ballot or writing to your congressperson is a very different form of politics than putting your body in the streets, even when it's for a protest and not some kind of direct action. Um, and we saw so many people doing that. Like the day after Trump was elected, people from the suburbs, from all walks of life, putting themselves out there. And I think we've only seen this kind of intensification of galvanizing people who were somewhat non-political to actually become more political in terms of thinking about how do we actually fight for a future that we want and how do we do it together in an intersectional way. And there are always debates within groups, especially places like the Women's March, about which women are getting more power, which women's voices are being left out. But I see those as political, as adjudicable, as something that happens when people come together, when they have to negotiate those hard questions about power. But that's still within the realm of what we do when we fight for politics. So I think there is a way in which more people who are not focused on politics are actually getting involved more in causes that they care about, but causes that are not directly related to their lives or their own identities, but something that they've now invested in. So I think that's, on the one hand. I think the question of how do we actually bridge those divides against people who are deeply Trumpist is another question, and it's hard because so many of Trump's policies are not just about kind of abstract economics, but they're really persecutorial. They are policies that support racism, policies that support Islamophobia, policies that literally demonize immigrants who are coming in from Central and South America in really violent ways. So it's really hard to think about then how do we come together in a bipartisan way with people who are deeply invested in those policies. I think the better path is just to continue to organize and bring into the fold people who reject that, but people who might not have felt comfortable really articulating their politics or voicing them before, because we've already seen that those groups are getting bigger and bigger since 2016. And I think that's kind of where the work is, because those policies are the ones that are expansive, that are arguing for how do we give people more power? How do we fight for more equality, more rights for people, nonviolent forms of inclusion? So that to me is where the work is.
And of course, that brings us to the last question, um, which is one of my favorite questions too, and that is the Democratic Party the right vehicle to push for serious social justice on all fronts? I mean, this is the depressing thing in so many ways that we have a toolbox and it has two things, and one thing can be problematic for so many people who would like to push for more progressive politics, and the other tool, which is the better one, in comparatively speaking, might only get you so far, which goes back to the two-party system. I mean, so yeah, I mean that it's it's a maze, and there's a circular situation there. So the question is the Democratic Party the right vehicle? And if the answer is no, it's not that there's an alternative. We're stuck.
Well, that's why I feel like the answer is both. Um, the Democratic Party is not the right vehicle, and yet it's what's there right now. And one of the things we've seen is that the party, on the one hand, has been responsive to huge pushes from outside politics and social movements, which absolutely have to stay outside because their voices can be much more clear and radical and unco-opted when they do that work. And we've seen huge amounts of grassroots organizing around the country in ways that I think is exciting. But I also think, once again, when we see the groups of people who are associated with the DSA, who are or other, more progressive groups who are then taking over parts within the party, and I think that does work too. I think I don't want to discount that because the Democratic Party in our two-party winner-takes-all electoral college system is kind of what we have right now. And they are always going to disappoint. They are always going to turn really exciting possibilities into watered down, mediocre half policies that don't really do the work they need to do. And yet still, I think that still needs to happen alongside all of the work that's being done outside politics, which is, where the energy is. But I think I am a both and person in that sense, because I don't
Yeah.
think totally, you know, I think totally dropping electoral politics never gets anybody anywhere, or dropping the party right now. I just don't think that that's going to help. But I think the only way that the party can really do things is the really loud, really insistent voices of masses of people coming together outside to push them to do it.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, in the end, I mean, the Democratic Party operates within a very similar framework in terms of political economy. I mean, major economic powers in this country often back the Democratic Party more, and these powers do not represent the change that many of us would like to see. So this is why I'm asking. I think you just froze, or you don't like at all what I'm saying. Yeah, you froze. So Elisabeth Anker was with us until she froze, and actually, I was going to end this call, but let's see if perhaps she can come back. She's back. Oh my God, this is so beautiful. Life can be a good thing. Let's see. Now she's completely dark. So I accepted. Uh, Libby, I'm trying to bring you back in. But if we are not able to bring Libby back in, I just want to say that I really enjoyed speaking with Libby. Thank you all for watching. I know I'm throwing these things out without any warning. Maybe it's just a quick note before the interviews. But this was actually, luckily, the end of the conversation. And I certainly have no idea what happened, except that Libby froze and then she turned really, into a black screen. But maybe that's actually, mysterious and beautiful. طيب. All right. Thank you all very much. We have quite a few people actually tuning in now, more than before. So just review or rewind and listen to the conversation. We talked about a whole bunch of things. There she is. Okay, I was stalling. Libby, hey. I
I
was
am really sorry about that. My computer, I've been having battery problems with my computer, and
No problem. Don't worry about the computer. No problem. You froze again. All right. Uh, I I will be. I will make an executive decision right now to. Okay, there we go. No, she's
there we go. The last 48 hours I've been having battery problems with my computer, and it died after 20
battery
minutes.
battery problems are better problems than other problems. I was just closing, and I was saying that my last comment is not the kind of thing that can take just a couple minutes to deal with, because it's really about whether beyond certain topics which are real, especially on certain issues, social issues, what is the fundamental difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, and we can talk about this another time. And as you might know, I will ask to speak with you again, and we can continue the conversation because you froze again. But that's kind of cool what's happening. So I'm gonna leave you, and I will actually end the conversation. I'll say thank you very much to Libby for joining us. Libby is again an associate professor of American Studies and Political Science at George Washington University, and she is the author of Orgies of Feeling, Melodrama, and the Politics of Freedom, and is now finishing two other books. So check her out, check out the interview, the discussion, and look out for more discussions on this election if things proceed in the manner that they are, where we don't know what's going on 100%. And I will try to also reach out to address foreign policy and things of that sort. We haven't even talked about any of that. Anyway, yalla, salam. See you, everybody. No, 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 no.